Hello, I'm Joan Retman, Area Community Relations Director at the Gardens at Town Square, which is one of 8 premier retirement communities owned and operated by Era Living. Before we start today's presentation on Alzheimer's disease and dementia care, the year ahead, I would like to share a little bit about Era Living Memory Care. This program is offered in a secure, home-like environment at 2 Era Living retirement communities, Ida Culver House Broadview, which is located in Northwest Seattle, and the Gardens at Town Square, which is on the edge of downtown Bellevue. Both of these communities also offer independent living and assisted living on the same campuses. Both the Gardens at Town Square and Ida Culver House Broadview employ what is known as the best friends approach to dementia care. And this was developed by David Troxel, who is our guest speaker today, and Virginia Bell. This is based on the concept that what everyone needs most is a feeling of being understood and cared for, just as one's best friend might make them feel. Now, I personally have been part of the team here at the Gardens at Town Square, and am so proud to share that our memory care program here has been a reliable and steadfast resource for over 20 years now. On your screen now is a picture of a model apartment within the Terrace, which is the name of our special memory care neighborhood. And although we know that our memory care environment is lovely with its private apartments as seen on your screen, and its inviting courtyard filled with flowers and greenery, what makes it truly special are the staff that work here and the way that they interact with our residents in such a personalized way. Should you visit us, I'll be happy to introduce you to team members who've been part of our activities teams, dining teams, and care teams for well over 10 years. And now I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker for today's event. We're so honored to host David Troxel back again. David has been internationally known for his writing and teaching in the fields of Alzheimer's disease and long-term care. He has co-authored, along with Virginia Bell, 6 influential books and articles related to dementia care, including the Best Friends Approach to Dementia Care and A Dignified Life. And David, it's so great to have you back again. Thank you so much and welcome.
Well, thank you, Joan. And I guess I'll say Happy New Year to everybody on the call, since I haven't seen many of you for a number of months. I want to say a special shout out and thank you to my friends at Era Living. I've always so enjoyed working with you as a consultant and best friend to your team. A lot of caring hearts, and I so appreciate it. And I want to thank a few of you. I see some familiar names and faces. I think there should be some kind of prize for people who hit 100% David Troxel webinars, but I see some people who've been on a number of them. So thank you for sticking with me during the educational pieces. I just thought I'd just share with you that as we start this year personally and professionally, I do view this as a time of great optimism. The last couple of years, of course, have been such tough years for all of us. And of course, also for people living with dementia. Frail elders in assisted living and nursing homes have been disproportionately affected. But during times of crisis, I also see so much kindness and efforts with companies and caregivers who are really trying to be there and be supportive. So let's hope we can finally shake off this pandemic. I have a public health background, and all pandemics do eventually end. So hopefully we will get there. But in terms of dementia research, there's also a lot of good information, a lot of good things happening. And I'll jump right in a moment and kind of begin to talk to you about some ideas for the year, and hopefully have some time for questions and discussion. So again, thank you for joining me today, and let's get this thing started. Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen. Again, a talk called Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia Care, the Year Ahead. I gave a similar talk about a year ago, and I do have some new information to share. Today, we will cover, we'll offer a brief overview of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I know many of you on this webinar have really been with me for the last year and a half, 2 years of webinars, but some of you may be new, so I always like to give a little update about that. We'll look at the current research pipeline for dementia medications. I'll offer some predictions for the year ahead. We ought to really keep a running tally, Joan, to see if I'm correct on any of these or not. You should probably record this and we'll watch it about 11 months from now to see how I did. We'll also talk a bit about caregiving tools from the Best Friends Approach, because again, I'm aware that this is kicking off a new series of webinars for 2022, and some of you may be new to this, so I always like to share a few techniques from the Best Friends philosophy about some do's and don'ts about about dementia care. As I've said before, more and more, I believe that there is a right way and a wrong way to do dementia care. And when you do it the right way, it pays a lot of dividends. Your job becomes more rewarding and easier. It fosters cooperation and success. And of course, ultimately helps the person living with cognitive loss. It helps them live at their fullest. So again, I'll give you some of these ideas as we go forward as well. So I'm going to share a headline from last year that I think is still very, very powerful to me. There's a weekly financial newspaper called Barron's, done by the Wall Street Journal. It's a very distinguished and popular kind of investment news. And here was their headline about a year ago, the other pandemic, Alzheimer's disease. And I think it's important to put this in the context that if COVID never have happened, I think we would have even had more focus about Alzheimer's disease and dementia the last couple of years, because it is an enormous public health crisis. It's the 6th leading cause of death in the US. I would guess probably now it's the 7th with COVID. The only one of the top 10 diseases that doesn't have an effective cure or truly impactful treatment. I'll talk briefly about Aduhelm today, this drug that did get approved last year. And again, the cost of this disease. I haven't updated these figures in the last year, but I don't know that I really need to, because we know it's a lot of money. Alzheimer's disease, $305 billion, rising to $1 trillion by 2050, according to 2 very good journals, because this disease is long, it's slow, it's progressive, and it's affecting more and more people. So I want to just put it in the context that we have a lot of work to do from a public policy point of view about dementia care, but kudos to my friends at the Alzheimer's Association for all of their advocacy work as well. Now, some of you have seen this picture, but some of you may not have, but here's the man who kind of started this whole thing off, although with a couple of other individuals, one of whom I'll talk about in a moment, Dr. Alzheimer. By all accounts, he was a very well-regarded, well-liked physician living and working in Germany in the early 1900s. He was a pathologist, and he was very fascinated by what would have then been called lunacy. You know, what causes this aberrant behavior, forgetfulness? Of course, back in the early 1900s, there were probably people who thought it was witchcraft or something in the air or water. But Dr. Alzheimer is a very progressive thinker, and he believed there was a link between the brain and behavior, which of course we now know to be true. Now, interestingly enough, I read a story in the New York Times about a year ago about a gentleman whom I'm embarrassed to say I really had not known much about. But I think this is a fascinating story, and I thought you might enjoy learning about this. But apparently, Dr. Alzheimer had quite a laboratory going and many colleagues. And one of his most trusted colleagues was actually the first African-American psychiatrist in the US, Dr. Solomon Carter Fuller, who was an American who I guess somehow got to know Dr. Alzheimer and worked in Germany with him. He was a key member of the team studying the brain, and he often goes uncredited for his contribution and equal partnership with Dr. Alzheimer. He was very much a part of the group that was doing the early pathology and doing the early writing. So very interesting to sort of see this unusual American connection to Dr. Alzheimer that I'd not really been fully aware of until recently. I think in a future talk, I may tell you a bit more about Dr. Fuller and his fascinating life. Now together, they must have met, of course, Dr. Alzheimer did, Augusta Deter. And she is certainly not the first person to ever have Alzheimer's disease, but we would say that she's the first person ever described as having Alzheimer's disease. So she was only 51. She met Dr. Alzheimer, her husband brought her in, and she was having some of the symptoms we classically recognize now as warning signs of Alzheimer's and many of the other dementias. Having problems with everyday tasks, including things she'd always been good at, like cooking, jealousy, delusions, which are defined as fixed false ideas, memory loss. And we actually found Dr. Alzheimer's notes and from the case, and she actually tells him, "Doctor, I have lost myself. I have lost myself." And certainly, I think we could all agree that this face is a troubling one, it's a sad one. She certainly looks a lot older than 51. Depression, malnutrition, all of these things are there. I don't think they deliberately in any way mistreated her, but she did end up in a lunacy asylum. And after she died, Dr. Alzheimer did an autopsy of her brain. He found these distinctive markers of Alzheimer's disease called plaques and tangles. The article was written, and in science, when you discover something, they name it after you. One of the things that I kind of like to do now and then is just look at this picture as I think about the world we're in. And, 1901 wasn't really that long ago historically. In many ways, what's pretty shocking to admit is that we don't truly have many more medicines that are that effective for Alzheimer's than we did in 1901. Obviously, stigma's fallen away, education, resources, knowledge have come so far. We know a lot about brain health that we didn't know then. But I have to say that this face of Alzheimer's is probably still there today, particularly when some people are facing loneliness and isolation. And so one of my goals professionally and personally is to draw attention to Alzheimer's so we can lift the person up and really have them be operating at their very best, not their worst. I think if Augusta had lived today, we might have very much been able to surround her more of a therapeutic, healing, positive environment, and perhaps not have seen such a woeful face and situation. So as I talk a bit about the dementias, I thought I'd spend a little bit of time, since this is our first webinar for the year, and just sort of define some terms. The word dementia in and of itself is not a diagnosis. If your doctor tells you your mother has dementia, it's just too broad, it's too nonspecific. You want to say, doctor, what kind of dementia does my mother have? Is it the classic dementias that are irreversible? Might it be something that's potentially reversible or treatable? So this word dementia is an umbrella term, something you all know about in Seattle, an umbrella term for many, many things that can cause cognitive loss. So I'll cover a few of these today, but again, Alzheimer's is probably about 60% of the cases. Vascular dementia related to stroke or interruption of blood flow to the brain is certainly a big chunk of them now. Many people I know are using the phrase vascular cognitive impairment. Something called mixed dementia, which is Alzheimer's plus vascular, frontal temporal dementia, which affects personality, younger people. Lewy body dementia often causes hallucination, motor disorders, and Parkinson's dementia. I have to look up my statistics, but I think it's something like 1/3 of people with Parkinson's will develop some cognitive issues. Again, forgive me that statistic's not quite popping into my brain. Now on the right, I'll talk about these in a moment. Remember that there are things that can look like Alzheimer's. Someone might be deeply depressed, and you want to say, well, is it the depression that's causing the cognitive loss, or is it depression plus Alzheimer's? Things like B12 deficiencies, thyroid issues, medication interactions. You always want to have a good medical evaluation and workup to see what's going on. So Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. This statistic is really maybe not that helpful, but the average course of illness is about 8 years. The reason why it's not all that helpful is I find that there are people who kind of crash through the stages of Alzheimer's in 3-4 years. There are people who live with it for 20 years, but on average about 8 years. It typically progresses slowly. Key symptoms are short-term memory loss, confusion, mistakes. It is sadly considered a fatal illness in many ways, because having Alzheimer's puts you at risk for so many other things, including a greater risk of falls, infection, et cetera. Dr. Jeff Cummings of Cleveland Clinic, who used to be the head of UCLA, very distinguished neurologist, he told me a little while back that aspiration pneumonia is actually the #1 cause of death for people with dementia, because again, that swallowing reflex, the motor reflex begins to suffer, and of course that can lead to pneumonia. So again, lots of challenges here. I think an excellent handout, some of you work professionally in the field, this is a great one just to take off the Alzheimer's Association website, but it's also to me a very good reminder that Alzheimer's and these other dementias are not just about memory loss, there's more to it. So these are the 10 warning signs that you might have a problem with dementia. Memory loss that disrupts daily life, challenges in planning or in solving problems, difficulty completing familiar tasks, confusion with time and place. Someone might think they're in London instead of New York, or LA instead of Seattle. They may think they're 40 and not 80. Problems with visual images and spatial relationships. Sometimes you'll see a person with Alzheimer's pick up a fork and they miss their mouth with it. This is one reason people with Alzheimer's are more at risk for falls. Misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps. I always smile about this one because I can be a bit absent-minded, and having particularly over the last number of years been on the road a lot until the pandemic hit, I was forever leaving my laptop charger somewhere, or one of my remote clickers for my presentations. But almost always when I got back home to Sacramento or back to my hotel that night, if I thought, oh my gosh, my laptop cord is missing, oh, David, you left it on the podium at the hotel. So again, I can retrace my steps, hopefully a sign of healthy memory. New problems with words and speaking or writing, misplacing things. Oh, sorry, I'm going backwards. Misplacing things, lose the ability to retrace your steps, decreased or poor judgment. My own forgetfulness here. Poor judgment. Number 8 is actually a concern. And I think particularly for those of you who are new to this, be aware that people, particularly if they're living alone, they can make poor decisions. And you can have people with dementia who are financially exploited by the bogus Canadian lotteries, or even sometimes friends, neighbors, or families. So do be aware of that. Withdrawal from work and social activities. I know my friends at Era Living, for example, are very sensitive. If you have someone who's living in independent living and you notice over a period of weeks that they're coming to the front desk 5, 6, 8, 10 times a day saying, now, when is my son picking me up? Or when is my son picking me up? They want to kind of keep an eye on those people, because sometimes those are people who are having some challenges. And of course, what happens then eventually is they stop coming to the farmer's market trip or stop coming to an activity. So if someone's pulling back or not going out and doing things, often they're aware that something's going on, particularly if they're living by themselves. So be aware this could be a sign. And then of course, changes in mood or personality. Now, I would wager that even some of you on this webinar today who might be 30 or 60 or 90, whatever your age, you might have one of these going on. Remember that this is something where it's truly disrupting your life. And I would say, particularly if you have several of these going on and you feel like they're progressive, you want to talk to your neurologist and see what's happening. Again, though, with Alzheimer's, I like to say you've met one person, you've kind of met just one person. This is why a progressive company like Era Living really focuses on kind of a positive approach to care, looking at skills and abilities with care plans instead of disabilities, because everyone's a bit different. Sure, there are people who can get angry and agitated and paranoid, but some are also very pleasantly confused and stay in good cheer. Again, lots of behavioral issues. We'll be covering some of those during this webinar series. Okay, so just a few more notes here about some of the other dementias. Vascular cognitive impairment results from brain damage caused by the interruption of blood flow to the brain. It can be caused by strokes. There's a lot of overlaps and symptoms with this and Alzheimer's, but it can cause this sort of disorientation, confusion, behavioral changes. It's not reversible, but often the vascular dementias, it seems like people kind of almost like it's a series of steps versus like a slow progressive downward curve. They can plateau for periods of times. And again, the diagnosis of mixed dementia, vascular plus Alzheimer's, can be something that you often will see together. Okay, Lewy body dementia. I'll just highlight this briefly. Some people feel this is actually the second, maybe the third most common form of progressive dementia after Alzheimer's. I like to think of it, even though it's a bit crude, as sort of a combination of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's in many ways. You begin to have some of the movement disorders, walking issues, gait issues, but a telltale sign is hallucination. When you begin to have hallucination, it can be caused again by something called Lewy bodies in the brain. And I will recommend to you, there's actually a Lewy body society that has good information. And again, lots of good materials out there with the Alzheimer's Association. Thinking, memory, and movement combined with the hallucination uniqueness of that can be a sign of Lewy body dementia. Frontal temporal dementia, it's the only dementia that affects more men than women. And very interestingly enough, the peak age is 55 to 65. This covers a range of brain disorders that affect the areas of the brain associated with personality, behavior, and language. So again, when you see this frontal temporal dementia, it's often people who get sort of delusions of grandeur. They have sort of a narcissism, they get very disinhibited with that frontal lobe damage. I like to nickname this the me disease, because they get very self-involved, eat a lot of sugar, etc. A few more things related to dementia and Alzheimer's. I always like to define the word. Again, some of you are expert at this, but others struggle. Again, dementia is that broad umbrella, kind of like the word soup, okay? When you think about the word soup, there are many, many types of soup, just like there are many types of dementia. So if you go to your favorite restaurant in Seattle, and I guess show your vaccine IDs these days, if you do that, and basically the waiter says, "Oh, we have a lovely soup today," you'll say, "Waiter, what is the soup of the day?" And he or she will say tomato or clam chowder or lobster bisque or whatever. So you see every clam chowder is a soup, but not every soup is clam chowder. If the doctor says your mother has dementia, you want to remember that, okay, well, what is the soup of the day? What type of dementia? Doctor, what type? And hopefully he or she will tell you Alzheimer's or Lewy body. You can diagnose these days, that they know enough about them and their appearances and how they present. So again, every Alzheimer's is a dementia, but not every dementia is Alzheimer's. So I hope that's something that's helpful for you as well. Now, a slide or two that I'd like to share with you all, again, related to care issues, because this is so important if you're a family member at home, or even if you're in assisted living or another care setting. Remember the words that I think is very eloquent by Dr. Michael McLeod, recently retired geriatrician from UC Davis Alzheimer's Center in California. Alzheimer's disease often comes with other treatable challenges that, left untreated, can worsen impairment. He likes to say dementia doesn't travel alone. And these are some of the things he has in mind, particularly if someone's living by themselves. Are they taking their medications wrong? Are they taking, things they shouldn't be taking? Alcohol, stroke, depression, malnutrition, hormone issues, blood sugar, diabetes, hearing, visual impairments. If their glasses are way out to date, if their hearing aid batteries are dead, this can kind of worsen their confusion. Blood sugar, diabetes. There's a lot of research now going on about the links between blood sugar and the brain. And we think that people who are, have diabetes, it's not being controlled, this can worsen cognition. Conversely, you get it under control, it can improve cognition. B12, D deficiency, sleep issues, and of course, loneliness and isolation. So again, particularly if you have a family member who's been living by themselves, I have to tell you, almost always that is a recipe for great worry. I've been in people's homes where you open the refrigerator and there's donuts and vodka, where you can see that their pills are all expired, or they're not really taking their pills correctly. So give some extra attention to those kind of care settings, okay? So now that we've talked a bit about the dementias and just give you a little bit of an update, I want to kind of now transition into, well, kind of what now? Mother has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, what do we do about it? Well, in general, today's treatment for dementia is to keep the person as healthy as possible. Again, addressing those treatable issues that Dr. McLeod writes about. Be sure they're having a brain-rich diet, healthy foods. I'm a big fan of the Mediterranean diet. Gosh, in the Northwest, you have such great seafood, but a diet rich in olive oil, seafood, vegetables, greens, antioxidants, less red meat, less dairy, very healthy for the brain. Again, give some careful attention to medications. There's something called polypharmacy, where sometimes a person will see multiple doctors and the doctors aren't really oriented or working together, and there's multiple meds prescribed for one condition. Under medication. Now, again, you may remember I said that aspiration pneumonia is an issue. So in general, you want mom and dad on as few pills as possible. Monitoring blood sugar, alcohol use, pain and depression, good heart health, and addressing isolation and loneliness. I'll mention pain and depression real quickly. Depression is a classic enemy of the brain and the body. The Alzheimer's Association says that about 40% of people who have Alzheimer's will experience bouts of depression. So you want to really try to treat depression with engagement, activity, sunshine as much as you can get in the Northwest, but also medications at times. And pain, a person with dementia can't always tell you that something hurts. And so instead, they may exhibit behavior because they're in pain, and that may be when they're pacing back and forth aggressively, or slap somebody, or crying out. So be aware of pain as a concern too. So again, let's assume everyone's doing well. You've caught all these things, you're on top of them. What about the meds? Well, I'm sure most of you on the call know about Aricept, Exelon, Razodine, and Namenda. Basically, the first three, Aricept, Exelon, and Razodine are called number 1, 2, and 4 are called cholinesterase inhibitors. And basically, they give the brain a little bit of boost. They kind of help those neurotransmitters stick around a bit longer. Namenda is an old German drug that has some other kind of neuroprotective qualities. And typically, the physician will put someone on either Aricept, Exelon, or Razidine, just one of those, they're all similar, and then eventually add Namenda as a second dose, and that combo therapy seems to be best. But those meds, they can boost functioning, help you do a bit better, but probably after 12 to 18 months, they've done most of their work. They're not really stopping the underlying course of illness. Now, very exciting, at least initially, we thought Aduhelm, named aducanumab, a Biogen drug, was approved in 2021 originally for all stages of dementia, but then very quickly changed to early stage dementia. This was the first medication approved by the FDA in almost 20 years. We had a huge drought of meds. Unfortunately, this medicine's proved to be very controversial, and many in the science community don't really believe it's that effective. Biogen started off charging $56,000, and now they cut it in half. Long story short, this is an option. It did seem to, in certain clinical trials for certain people, actually be disease modifying. The Alzheimer's Association as an advocacy group has supported the medication and feels that this is just the start of good things to come and will encourage greater investment in the pharmaceuticals. But for now, it's probably not going to be helpful for most of you on this webinar. It's really just primarily for people who might be in the earliest, almost preclinical phases of Alzheimer's. We can talk more about that later as well. But how wonderful that at least we have a new medication got approved. It's not been widely adopted. I think it's probably not going to be a market success, but there hopefully will be other compounds from drug companies like Eli Lilly and others to come even this year. Okay, so some predictions. Every year, Dr. Jeff Cummings, who I quoted earlier about aspiration pneumonia, he does a research update of the research pipeline, so to speak, and talks a bit about what's under review, he and his colleagues. This is a very influential review article that comes out every year. And this one is from May 2021, and updating one that I'd given you previously in last year's webinar, or the year before. I lose track over time at this point, early in 2022. But as of May 2021, there are 126 agents in 152 trials assessing new therapies for Alzheimer's disease. Of great interest to me is that 30 of them, what is that, about 25%, are in what we call phase 3 clinical trials, where they're being tested on people having been determined to be safe to try. 74 in that phase 2, 24 in phase 1. The majority of these medications are looking at the underlying biology of Alzheimer's, but some are looking at psychiatric symptoms. And how terrific is this? Although I kind of suspect that COVID has played havoc with this and with many studies, but more than 38,000 participants were let's see, pardon me, about 38,000 people are participating. Forgive my typos there. About 38,000 participants are registered for current clinical trials, and cumulatively they will contribute more than 2.5 million participant weeks in trials. So I wanted to say a shout out for any of you who've been part of clinical drugs trials, because this is very important. We need to have research subjects who are willing to help other people and try these medications. Across all the clinical trials, biopharmaceutical companies sponsor 50% roughly of trials and collaborate another 14% sponsored by public and private partnerships. So I have to say there's still enormous impact from the private sector, but also the government itself through NIA is also funding a lot of studies, and through the Alzheimer's Disease Research Centers, including, I think, UW, that has a. So 2022, where are we for the rest of this year? So here are just a few things for you to be aware of. There is growing recognition that many dementias are mixed dementia. Thus, according to researcher Serge Gauthier, who's at McGill University in Montreal, rather than driven by one cause, Alzheimer's and related dementias are driven by a host of genetic and environmental risk factors that develop over decades. So it's almost like it could be a syndrome. And this might explain one reason why, again, so many people with dementia present differently. When my mother lived in memory care in Sacramento, there were 20 residents in her neighborhood, and all of them were so different in what they could retain and do and participate in. This might be part of it. Dr. Gauthier's research suggests more customized and directive clinical trials and the potential for individualized drug treatments, so-called personalized medicine approaches in the future. So again, in the future, we may look at a drug like Aduhelm and be able to really see this works for people with certain genetic markers, certain kinds of biomarkers in their bodies, and we might be able to kind of design more of that custom cocktail to support treatment for Alzheimer's disease. The role of biomarkers will greatly expand, and we may finally have a blood test or spinal fluid test that can easily diagnose Alzheimer's. Again, biomarkers are things like, your spinal fluid. It can be blood. It can be the scans that can look for amyloid in your brain. They now have PET scans that can pick up the amyloid. So the body's markers of some changes that are going on. And of course, what is so interesting is, more and more we're learning about the earlier diagnosis. And these biomarkers and other tests might allow us to actually say, somebody with Alzheimer's, somebody has Alzheimer's at the age of 40, even though it may not be symptomatic for 30 years, okay? We will learn, the second bullet there, we will learn more about risk factors, including genetics and lifestyle, to be able to get, to identify people likely to get Alzheimer's disease. And this earlier diagnosis piece will be very important. Most people are diagnosed rather late in the illness. And there's definitely a sense, as I'll talk about in a moment, that if you do have a new medication, the earlier you give it, the better. So we'll be looking at kind of broader public health scans about indicators for dementia. For example, maybe your doctor will eventually have a screen that pops up. And if you're over 65 and have a first-time diagnosis of depression, that might trigger a cognitive exam, because after all, is it depression or is it something else? So again, more sophistication coming with our medical community. I like this study, which again, I believe is an annual review that Lancet does about lifestyle prevention and generally updates on dementia. Lancet, the very prominent British research magazine for healthcare, the research journal, basically says that there was a consensus report, it reports in 2020, about prevention and intervention and care. And the following factors seem to be the ones that we truly want to pay attention to as individuals, particularly any of us who have Alzheimer's in our family. The way we may be able to delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease, really seize control of our health. And hopefully, you want to get Alzheimer's as late as possible in life. Even if you have a genetic risk factor for it, you want to get it when you're 90, not 80, or 80, not 70, right? Because Alzheimer's is slow and progressive. And even if you are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, you might have several good years. So these are the things that we think will help. Controlling blood pressure, encouraging use of hearing aids. It's a really interesting piece of research that's been written on a number of studies that apparently people with poor hearing who aren't getting that stimulation because they can't hear, they may be at greater risk for actually developing Alzheimer's. Reducing exposure to air pollution and secondhand smoke. There have been some very fascinating studies about the risk factors of getting Alzheimer's and the possibility of air pollution and pollutants being harmful to the brain. Preventing head injury. There's an old kind of nomenclature for dementia, some types of dementia called dementia pugilistica for the fighters or boxers. You want to avoid concussion. Of course, we're seeing that with the NFL players. Limit alcohol misuse, avoid smoking, provide children with primary and secondary education. We have now learned that early childhood education through a series of studies called the NUN study, the nuns who had a very robust childhood education had less Alzheimer's than those who did not. We think that early childhood education helps build this sort of cognitive reserve, which is so good for all of us. Reducing obesity linked to diabetes, exercise, good sleep, and of course, my favorite here, socialization and community involvement. I like to say the brain loves company. And for those of you who are caregivers, do your best to be sure that the person you're involved with is getting out, is exercising, is seeing other people the best we can during the pandemic, has a lively caregiver, or is in assisted living where they have good activities, because again, this socialization is very important and very good for the brain. A few more things related to research and studies, and hopefully we'll have some time for discussion and questions. One study that I think is going to be very interesting and the results are expected next year is something called the US Pointer Study. It's a United States study to protect brain health through lifestyle intervention to reduce risk. And this study is to determine whether lifestyle changes can indeed protect memory and thinking skills of people at risk of developing dementia. So basically, they've taken a group of people, they have a control group as well, and they're looking at things like physical exercise, nutritional counseling and modification, cognitive and social stimulation, and improved self-management of health. This is being taken place, a study largely funded, I believe, from the Alzheimer's Association. It's taking place at 5 sites across the US to see indeed whether there are some lifestyle factors that will help. I have to tell you right up front, I will be shocked if this study doesn't show that you can really modify your chances of getting Alzheimer's disease. This was something that seemed very hocus pocus, 20 years ago, and we thought, oh, it's just a disease, there's not much you can do about it. But I think this is going to be very, very powerful. I think in the future, particularly if you are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at a younger age, your doctor might even write out an old-fashioned prescription that he wants you to eat well and exercise and be involved in life and sing in the church choir and go take a trip somewhere, really to live your life fully. I think that will be very important messages from our physicians as they talk to people living with dementia. Again, will 2022 be an important year of progress in terms of research? I think the answer is yes. The Alzheimer's Association funds independent researchers worldwide through its International Research Grant Program. Currently, the association is the largest funder of private research in the US, investing over $250 million to more than 750 projects in 39 countries. Now, it's interesting. I did not really know that the Alzheimer's Association was working at such a global scale in the US, but I think that's really impressive. Again, 750 projects in 39 countries. And this instrumental research will be very, very important. When you have money, you can get things done in terms of research. And obviously, if the feds can spend $2.3 billion, the Alzheimer's Association can't spend that. They can spend maybe 100 million. But this is really important. And this is an investment, not an expense, because we can see that Alzheimer's is enormously expensive. Half the people in the country who are on Medicaid or Medi-Cal in nursing homes, where the federal government pays basically for care, half of them have Alzheimer's disease. In-home services, all the enormous medical costs that people go through with dementia in the last few years of their life even. We know it's a tremendously expensive disease. Many of us have had to cut down on work or give up careers to be a caregiver. So I'm so happy that we are now making these appropriate investments. We have a tremendous group of Alzheimer's researchers. And what I like about the field is that they're working together. By and large, it's very collegial. People make sure that the NII and the feds really try to make sure people are cooperating and focusing on the important things, which I think can be really, really valuable going forward. So again, I know I've kind of thrown in the kitchen sink on this talk. I hope I'm not throwing too much at you. We'll have a bit more narrow topics as we go forward. But there'll be some caregiver tools I'd like to just share with you real quickly from Era Living and its Best Friends program. We do know how to deliver excellent care, creating what I like to call this healing or therapeutic environment. And it's simply to have well-trained people, good healthcare coverage, and to create a day filled with music, art, affection, exercise, conversation, good food, and outdoor time. And I like to say when you're working with a person with dementia, their life story, you're providing them with activity and engagement, you're controlling their meds carefully and really doing everything right. It helps that person living with cognitive loss feel safe, valued, and productive. And you see, for those of you who are staff members on this call, remember that if the person is doing well, you're going to have a lot more cooperation. If I take a few minutes to be a little less task-oriented, a little bit more person-centered, if I'm supportive, if we have a nice connection, if the person's happy, basically everything goes better. So again, remember as a caregiver, as you learn some of these strategies, it can be very important. So again, learn all you can. Thank you for being part of this webinar series. Don't wait to use services. I imagine the Seattle area is resource rich. So see if there's a local adult day center to enjoy or use, get a good in-home caregiver. And if you think that assisted living or senior living is going to be in the cards, I definitely encourage you to visit some communities, make a game plan. You may be determined never to move mom into assisted living or your husband, wife, or partner. but life happens, and I don't want you to have to make a decision in an emergency. So, visit programs, look at who has distinctive programming, good training, good philosophy you care about, and make some decisions. Work to create this therapeutic healing environment, even if you're at home. Do more with music. Song lyrics and music live in a different part of the brain than words and language. So make sure music's in the bedroom, in the house, so you can listen to your favorite Dolly Parton or Louis Armstrong or opera. Life story work. I would encourage you to write a short kind of memoir or mini memoir about your family member, or at least a top 10 list of some of their preferences. That way, if you ever have an in-home caregiver, they'll know what to look for. If your family member has to go to the hospital, you want staff to know a lot about the person and use it. Hey, George, what's this I hear? You won the Physician of the Year award. Or, gosh, Molly, I hear you were Washington State's distinguished poet. Things like that. Or even just someone's favorite food. Dad, I hear you make the best apple pie, and tell me how you do that. So again, all of these life story pieces are very, very good. Effective communication, learning to communicate from your heart more than your head, show that affection, demonstrate kindness, give lots of compliments, be reassuring. These are all things you can learn, and the Alzheimer's Association has a lot of good handouts on communication. And I think Era Living also has a best friends handout on communication that I can make sure we get you if you need that too as well. Be creative with your approaches to behavior. Remember, it's the disease, not the person. When things are going wrong, you want to step back and look for triggers and understand what's happening, kind of be a bit of a detective. And you can often figure out what maybe caused some of that behavior or challenges and try to regroup. And of course, activities and engagement, keep them busy and engaged the best you can. So as we wrap things up, I'll just sort of kind of throw at you a little case study here. So imagine that Era Living or some other place has a new resident. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that she or he is a retired hotel manager from a 5-star ritzy hotel, and now they have Alzheimer's. Well, they move into your building, and what are you going to do about it? Well, for 30 years they were this very prestigious hotel manager at the Ritz-Carlton or one of the famous hotels. You can imagine someone like that has had a productive life, a busy life, a life where they've been involved with so many people. So how can we kind of bring them back some of this joy? Well, maybe give George a clipboard with a daily schedule, a to-do list. Ask for advice on menus and meal plans. Have them organize a happy hour. Fold napkins, set the table, getting ready for a big event. Hotel managers, I imagine, kind of make the daily rounds and walk the territory and look to see what's going on. So maybe George and you walk the building, do some simple chores and repairs. Life story work, reminiscing. Sometimes people forget what happened this morning at 10 o'clock, but they remember what happened 10 or 20 years ago. Maybe there's some humorous recollections that George remembers, weddings that went wrong, or a VIP shows up and you have no rooms, or maybe some famous movie stars who were at the hotel. So just ask some questions. What did you do when a VIP showed up and you had no rooms? Things like that. Life advice. Maybe you're the administrator at Era Living or another place. George, you've managed so many people in your life. Can you give me some advice? Talk about, how do you hire a good person, and how do you encourage or reward someone who's done a great job? And maybe George, the retired hotel manager, can give you lots of ideas. Perhaps you can ask another question. How do you deal with difficult people? How do you keep your own spirits up when you have long hours of work? When you ask somebody their opinion, it means that you value them. So again, this can be very positive. Reminiscing about cities where he worked and lived. And again, having fun with the internet. You discover that George worked for Ritz-Carlton or Hyatt or Hilton for his whole career. You discover that he worked in Honolulu. Well, go on YouTube and show him videos of the hotel where he worked, or look at things like that. Often those videos can kind of cue someone and bring back lots of special memories. Maybe your dad was a farmer in Walla Walla or Yakima. See if you can find pictures of that hometown and historic things and enjoy them together. And the nice thing is when you kind of program in this way, again, it helps that person feel happy and connected and engaged, but it also, I think, could be good learning for all of us and something that kind of be special for us as well. So I'll just do my own little 1-minute plug here. You're welcome to reach out to me at bestfriendsapproach.com or on Facebook if you If any of you are on Facebook, you can always put in the words Best Friends Approach and hit the like button and like my work. Those are some of the books I've written. I think Era Living has a couple copies, and probably you could get one of them as well. I'm also simply at davidtroxel@gmail.com, or you can reach me through Era Living. I'm always happy to talk to someone by phone or Zoom or answer any questions you have. Again, thank you, Era Living, for sponsoring this series here. We have more to come, and you can learn more about their program at eraliving.com / memory care. So again, thank you all very much for letting me chat with you and visit. And we have about 10 minutes, which is great, 13 minutes or so, but I don't mind staying on a bit later. Any questions or comments? Thank you. And you're welcome to type them in the chat room. You can also hold down the space bar and just speak them out if you'd like, or take yourself off mute and ask them in person. Thanks, Joan.
Thank you, David. I think I saw a hand go up. Mr. Goldstein, are you able to hit your space bar, please, to maybe unmute your microphone? Try that and see if it works.
Or the bottom left is that mute button.
Yes, or click on the little microphone, unmute. While you're working on,
I think he's off the mic. There he is. Hi, Bert.
You've talked about various levels, types of dementia, levels of dementia, kinds of care. How does ERA decide when you need a higher level of care? No, they have trained people, I'm sure, and experience, but how do they decide, or who decides?
Sure. Bert, I'll defer to my friends at Era Living. I can just say globally, to me, a community looks at each person as an individual. There's not necessarily, I found, to have an exact, point system or, detailed system doesn't really work all that well because everyone's so different. But typically they would look at each person individually, and they would also look at safety issues and socialization issues. And hopefully a team, more than just one person, is sort of a group effort to find that right level of care. But let me just ask Joan or somebody from Era Living to comment. And of course, I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you after the webinar as well.
Yes, that's exactly right, David. Each person is evaluated differently, and it does depend on a number of things. It's also not just 100% the decision of the community itself, but we look at each person as kind of a team effort, so to speak. So sometimes there's family involvement, sometimes there's a spouse that's involved, and sometimes there's even outside services and us. So it could potentially be a combination of different sources to make that determination if it's the right fit. So what I'll recommend is for one of us to follow up with you directly to maybe learn more specifically about your situation, and then we can answer in much more detail then.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Terry also had his hand up. Maybe we can go to Terry for your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. This is a general question. I want to maybe hear a little bit more about how Alzheimer's can be inherited or considered a hereditary disease.
Thank you, Terry. Well, some of our thoughts about this have been evolving, but basically, I think the best way to put it is Alzheimer's is not a classically inherited disease. So you can have lots of people in your family with Alzheimer's and never get it. You can have nobody in your family and get it. About a third of us will get dementia in our lives. So again, the numbers are a bit against us. I think probably a better way of saying it, Terry, is that Alzheimer's is what we call a familial disease. So it does seem to run in some families. You're generally at greater risk if you have a family member, like mother or father, who get it younger versus older. You might have a bit more of a risk there as well. There are genetic screens, including one called APOE, that can show your risk factors. But one problem with them, at least right now, is they don't always show you when you're going to get it. So you can have, for example, something called an APOE 4/4, which puts you in the highest risk, but it doesn't tell you if you're going to get it when you're 50, 70, or 90. So that's a problem. So that's my short answer. you shouldn't worry too much about inheritability, but in some families, there is something going on. And there are some rogue genes where people get it in their 20s and 30s, but that's very rare. Other questions or comments?
We do have another question that came in through chat, which says, you mentioned possible lifestyle changes. Where is the latest research found?
Well, if you go to that Lancet article that I mentioned, which I think is in the public domain from 2020, that would be a link as well. The Alzheimer's Association has some good articles about it. And I think if you just Google, there's Google research, I think you could find some good pieces on it as well. But there's a lot of good material out there, I think, that's been written about, for example, exercise, which I think is #1 as a preventative strategy or something that might help you delay the onset. Good heart health. So there's been quite a bit out there. But I'd probably start with the Alzheimer's Association or Mayo Clinic's website and look at that Lancet article. And Joan, maybe someone from Era Living could send out a link to that. I'll have to dig that up or just Google that and send the link out to participants. Joan? I think it's accessible.
Joan, you said you're recording this. Are you going to send out an email of the link spot where we can re-watch it?
Well, we'll be happy to do that, yes.
There you are.
Let's see, we have another question in the chat, which is, does dementia often skip a generation, such as if you had grandparents that had it, but your parents didn't? Is it then likely that you might?
No. That's my understanding, no. What it is when you think about it again, with 15% of people over 65 getting dementia, probably 28, 30, 35% of people over 85, we're all living so much longer. So let's say both your parents had dementia in their late 80s or 90s. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a genetic risk. So we're learning more about this, but I'm not aware, at least I shouldn't be so flippant and just say no. I'm not aware of any research that suggests there's generation skipping.
Okay. Another question for you. Have you heard much about the possibility of coconut oil being used to treat people that have dementia?
Okay, well, I get myself in trouble about this because I get accused of being kind of stodgy, but you know, part of me wonders if the Coconut Council of America came up with all that, or the International Coconut Society. You know, there's really no evidence that that is helpful. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence. People begin to believe certain things, but I tend to be, you know, more evidence-based. And I think there's a belief, at least among more serious academics, that that does not really work very well. I will give the government credit, or doesn't work, I should say. I will give the government credit. You know, they've actually researched some of these things. Like, remember when you read about turmeric? That was something that was researched. Vitamin E was researched. They've taken some of these sort of popular folk kind of remedies and ideas, ginseng, and they've studied them. And to date, to the best of my knowledge, most of those have washed out. That they've even used, you know, clinical grade ginseng and clinical grade this or whatever, and they haven't really proved to be neuroprotective.
David? Would anybody else like to take yourself off mute with a question?
Some good questions from this crowd.
Oh, yeah. What percentage of people 90 and over come down with dementia?
Okay. I'm sorry, I can't give you the exact number, but I'm going to say it's about a third. Yeah. Now, the good news there is about 2/3 don't, right? It doesn't mean we don't get more forgetful as we get older. I get more forgetful as I get older, but in terms of challenges, I would say it's about a third.
David, for the medications that we were talking about earlier, Aricept, Namenda, and such, do you feel like those medications are typically very beneficial? In other words, if you have some sort of a diagnosis of dementia, would you say that most people benefit from it? And if not, maybe who are the people that should stay away from those medications?
Well, the good news, my mother had Alzheimer's. She passed away in 2008, and she was on Aricept for a number of years, and then Namenda. And my father felt that they made a difference for her, and she stayed on them, I think, for like 6 years. There's really no evidence that they continued to work, but my father just was sort of fearful about taking her off. And of course, it was his call, not mine. And the good news about these medications, Joan, the current 4 I mentioned, is their side effect profiles are very minimal. So they're safe drugs. So I do recommend them, particularly if someone's earlier or younger in the disease. They're earlier in their disease process, earlier stages. I would say they're probably not that helpful if someone's diagnosed very late in their illness. Probably not that helpful. But yeah, I would definitely try them. And the challenge is, and I'll just be really direct. There's a placebo effect. If I give a caregiver, if I'm a caregiver and the doctor says, take these pills, your mother might do better, and I give her the pills, I might call my doctor, oh my gosh, doctor, yes, she's doing so much better. Well, maybe it's a placebo, a sugar pill, but I sort of want her to do better. I see her doing better. And so there's that impact with Aricept and some of these medications that are pretty subtle. But I definitely would recommend everybody try them early on, because hey, if it gives you another year and a half of better thinking and functioning, that's great.
Thank you, that's perfect.
I've also read some studies of Aricept that if someone's not been on Aricept and, for example, and maybe having some behavioral issues sort of later in the illness, maybe put them on Aricept, even mid-stage as sort of a better drug than the psychotropics with very few side effects that can help sometimes with behaviors. There are people, by the way, who don't do well on these meds. They can cause vivid dreams. They can cause GI issues. And we all react differently. So there are some people who have trouble.
Question.
Thank you.
Yes. Do you have any information on whether or not long-term care usually covers dementia, housing?
Yes, my understanding is that long-term care insurance policies absolutely cover memory care. Sometimes you have to jump through the hoops. Insurance companies are rather notorious for turning people down the first go round. I think most of the providers out there can help you do the application. But yes, a lot of people buy long-term care insurance for that coverage as well. Medicare will cover short-term rehab stays. If someone's been in a hospital, for rehab. But there's really no, at least, I don't know, maybe Washington might have some state-funded programs, but most states don't have any government support for memory care. It's often private pay. But long-term care insurance, if you're lucky enough to have it, can be very beneficial.
Thank you.
You're welcome. By the way,
I'll even add that.
Oh, sorry, Joan, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to quickly add that, well, in my own parent situation, my mom's memory loss is very progressed, and she does have long-term care insurance. And so even though physically she's doing really well and can be pretty independent still with what we would say activities of daily living, the physical types of care, her memory loss was progressed enough that the insurance kicked in. So many policies say if it's advanced or severe memory loss, the language is sometimes a little different. That would be the one thing you need to qualify, or it's 2 or more activities of daily living is pretty common. That was the case with my mom, and she was approved.
There is, I believe it's nationwide, but there's a program called HICAP, H-I-C-A-P, that often your area agency on aging has, that is like an advocacy group and will help seniors with insurance issues. But I'm guessing, Joan, your team would be happy to help anybody sort of figure out their insurance policy.
Absolutely. We help with those on a regular basis. Well, I think it is 3:01, so I think we are at time. Again, we're happy to send out the recording of this. There's such great information on this that we welcome you to share this with other people. I know it's actually really common that a lot of people come, and when they tour in communities like ours, they might have someone who has memory loss, but there isn't a diagnosis yet. And sometimes they might say, yes, my loved one probably has some kind of dementia, but is there even a point of knowing which kind, because there is no cure? I think there's so much great content in this webinar alone that explains all of the reasons why it is important to get information that you do have measures that you can take to improve quality of life and really focus on all of the positive components there, that, please share this with anyone who you feel might also be hesitant in getting a diagnosis and seeking out the right information. So thanks, David, for providing such good content for that. We really appreciate it. It's so great to have you here, like always. We always learn so much from you. For everyone on the call, you will get a follow-up email from the Gardens at Town Square and Ida Culver House Broadview. Whomever sent you the Zoom link will send you the same follow-up survey that will ask you your feedback for this. And please take the time to share that feedback with us. It's so important for future webinars as well. So thank you so much once again, David. It's been wonderful having you here, and we'll see you all again soon at another webinar.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.